Well, with messenger RNA, we've had miraculous breakthrough with a series of vaccines from Moderna and BioNTech and Pfizer in partnership. And it seems as though this has come out of nowhere, right? And now we have something miraculous that can be applied to all sorts of therapies and vaccinations for other diseases. Well, the challenge is that while it is miraculous, it's certainly not an overnight sensation. So this has been 20 years in the making. And what were the real issues? So one of the challenges we had in understanding that RNA, which is essentially a messenger that tells a cell to produce a certain protein, which sends a certain signal to tell the body to do something. And that's basically the science. The challenge is, while that sounds great theoretically, what would happen is when we would develop therapies using this technology, the therapies would be maybe effective on the first dose, diminishing on the second dose, and then we'd find that there really wouldn't be much efficacy from there. The other challenge is that the body produces an inflammatory response, which is referred to as a cytokine storm, where the body's inflammatory response would be so great it would overwhelm the benefit of this therapy. So now we had, though, a crisis. And what happens in crisis? Well, we see that while we have great potential, we couldn't really apply it on a broad scale. And so there was much confusion about where we could actually apply this. Would it be good for a vaccine? And one of the challenges with vaccines, to be quite blunt, is vaccines aren't that profitable. And many pharmaceutical companies have just abandoned vaccine programs. And one of the reasons why we have a pandemic and why we fear other pandemics is we haven't really been very preventative in the way we treat our medicine. And of course, our medical care is also personal choice, and some of those personal choices prevent, let's say, preventative measures that can be effective. So what we had, though, is we certainly had a crisis and a panic. And we have this pandemic, and so now we had to think about, well, what could we do? Well, messenger RNA is sort of perfect for a vaccine. It's one dose. It can show some efficacy right away. And then, of course, we've had second doses and booster shots, but fundamentally, it's designed for vaccination. Now, that was the real breakthrough. And the interesting thing is, when one thinks about the way vaccines are manufactured, you're very challenged to think that this is advanced science. If you've ever gone to one of these facilities, you see like a series of eggs where you're growing this virus in this egg to try to attenuate it to then create a vaccine. Well, messenger RNA, you have no attenuation, you don't have a live virus that you've killed, you don't have any of those things. And so you also produce basically in a bag full of enzymes. And so the miraculous thing, which I think is important to understand, is when we released the genetic code, which was January, February of 2020, within a few weeks, Moderna had essentially a working model for a vaccine. And they could dose humans even before we had the first reported cases that came to the United States. So a phenomenal, fundamentally miraculous development. And now that points to great opportunity and great potential. But the challenge is, well, you've got to manufacture and distribute this on a global scale. So, one of the analogies we talk about is, imagine Henry Ford coming up with a way to make the Model T and it rolls off the line and you say, well, that's great. Now we need 1 billion of them, right? That's really what happened here. We said the science is great, the discovery is very quick, and we have a model that can be produced, but then you've got to produce it. And we just don't have those facilities globally. Now, obviously we had a global crisis. We put a lot of resources there, but that is not the steady state. And that's not how this industry is going to develop. So we have a real challenge. And then, so I talk about, well, you can't escape gravity. Gravity means, well, a product in design is great, but you have to produce it. It has to be consistent. It has to be safe. It has to be distributed on a global scale, right? These are really challenging. Now, the other thing is, just because there's efficacy with a single vaccine, that doesn't mean this is an industry, right? So can it be applied to other diseases? Can we actually have a vaccine for things like malaria, HIV? Can we even treat cancer? Can we develop therapeutic drugs? Now, before, the body had a dramatic inflammatory response and it really wasn't appropriate for therapy. Well, we may have an ability to have a breakthrough that enables us to manage the body's inflammatory response as well as be able to customize essentially a treatment for serious diseases. Again, cancer is one thing that comes to mind immediately. And we've been searching for, we'll call it the cancer vaccine, for a long time, which enables the body to fight this, invader, as it were. And so if we can handle the mutated cells while keeping healthy cells intact, we do have a miraculous therapy. But we're a long way from that. There's a lot of promise, but not a lot of real delivery. And so that's when I talk about we have significant costs and risks, but there has been substantial value that's been created. One of the things to understand is that Moderna and BioNTech, that developed a single vaccine to handle the coronavirus, they have combined market caps of over $100 billion, pardon me. So $100 billion of value is essentially created by a non-economic opportunity. Let's be clear, the present value of vaccine doses does not add up to $100 billion. The promise is that there will be additional therapies, additional vaccines, and additional growth. So there's tremendous value to be gained. The challenge is that the science is still at issue. There are still barriers. They may be insurmountable. The body doesn't really like a lot of foreign injections, and we've come to understand that. And essentially want us to understand that it's not just the messenger RNA. That in itself can be a benign treatment. The issue is you have to deliver this. So a vaccine has really three components. And in the case of the messenger RNA vaccine, you have the RNA, but that's encapsulated in a nanoparticle. That nanoparticle has to be inert. The body, in many ways, reacts to the nanoparticle, and it reacts with an inflammatory response, not necessarily to the RNA. Then on top of that, the RNA inside the nanoparticle has to be in some kind of liquid, typically some oil. And that also has to be inert and benign for the body. And so these are all challenges, and that's just for a vaccine. Now try to treat therapy or therapeutic treatment where you now have a body reacting to a disease, and then you're giving it a treatment that says, well, go treat that disease. That's not an easy cascade. And so while tremendous value is given in the market to these opportunities, and while this is a breakthrough, and I think this vaccine is miraculous and can't understate how important this development has been, but the real challenge is, can it be an ongoing scientific breakthrough that really generates value, generates products that can really address unmet medical needs? And that's still uncertain.